From the Toronto Star, I'm Reggie Mudler, and this matters.
This is an important announcement from the Toronto District School Board. Toronto Public Health has just announced that all schools in Toronto, including those at the TDSB, will be closed to students for in-person learning.
It was the call that most parents had been waiting for. Schools out for COVID again. With rising case counts and variants of concern swirling, many of the school boards in the province have now switched to remote learning once again, including the country's largest, the Toronto District School Board. Parents, students, and teachers have faced a yo-yo type of year, as the province insisted schools are safe while teachers and their unions tried to raise their concerns. This week, the medical health units decided to enact a 2-week shutdown. This comes as Ontario is set to announce another stay-at-home order. Keeping schools open has been a priority, but COVID-19 has had other lesson plans. Kris Rushowy is a reporter in the Star's Queen's Park Bureau, who covers Ontario politics and was formerly an education reporter. She joins us to talk about how we got here and what may come next. Kris, it is always a pleasure to have you on This Matters and for catching up. Thank you so much for making the time at what I know is a very busy and crazy time.
It is a very busy and crazy time, but thank you very much for having me.
So Kris, let's start with exactly where we're at. We're speaking now. It is now Wednesday morning. Toronto parents like myself got some news yesterday. Where are we at now with schools and remote learning across the province?
So on Easter Monday, we heard from the Peel Region Public Health Unit, and they said all their schools are going to shut down, all public, all private, as of Tuesday. And then on Monday night, we heard from Toronto Public Health that about 20 schools, public and Catholic, were going to be shut down. And then on Tuesday, we heard from Toronto Public Health again saying all Toronto schools are going to be shut down as of Wednesday. So that's where we are right now in the Toronto and the GTA area. Other news from this morning, there's been so much news already today. So already news from this morning, the York Region Board at a meeting last night voted to ask the Education Ministry and the local public health unit to shut down its schools. Now that would be really significant because if that actually happens, you would have the 3 largest boards in the province shut down. So Toronto, Peel, and York. So that would be huge. And the other thing that happened this morning is Education Minister Stephen Lecce was out on TV and spoke to a TV reporter and was saying that with the impending stay-at-home order, the shutdown order coming from the province, that schools will not be impacted. So again, any decisions we see on school closings and then this move to remote learning, online learning, will come from the local public health units themselves.
I want to unpack that. It was really a bit of a domino effect this week, and really, this is coming from the medical officers of health, right? They are the ones that are pushing this and are pushing these closures. Let's be very clear about that, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Is it fair to say that the province was really, really hoping they could get to Friday and they could get to the April break? I know this is going to sound a little bit weird because it seems to me like Doug Ford is kind of like that student who's like, oh, tomorrow, you'll have my decision tomorrow. But basically they had already moved April break to next week. It was supposed to be off. Did you think that they were hoping that they could get to that and then make some decisions?
Well, look, the Premier and the Education Minister have both been very clear that they want to keep schools open. So I think that's why you have been seeing the local public health units pushing this issue. We heard in Peel a couple of weeks ago that the school boards met with public health and the ministry, and they wanted to shut down schools then because they saw cases rising, in the community, obviously, and then they're coming into the schools. The Dufferin Peel Catholic Board had a case at one school, actually 3 cases where 3 staffers were in hospital. So they were sort of seeing this on the ground and was raising a lot of concerns for them. So that's why you see this. And I should also mention that boards in Northern Ontario, Thunder Bay area, Sudbury, and then Northwestern Ontario, they have also shut down their schools and moved to online learning. And Sudbury and Thunder Bay did actually several weeks ago. So I always look to the northern boards because they're a bit ahead of us, right? Their kids went back to school earlier in January than kids in Southern Ontario. And now they've also moved to remote learning, online learning much faster than the rest of the province.
All right. So, like I said, it's Wednesday morning. We are hearing there's going to be a 28-day stay-at-home order supposedly coming today from the Premier. Right now, for schools, this is a 2-week order. So I believe we are closed until April 19th. Well, that's when my kid is supposed to go back, supposedly. I am super skeptical about that. Should I be?
Yes. So I don't have any inside knowledge, but yes, I think we should be skeptical. What happened last year at this time? Schools were shut down and it lasted until the end of the school year. We've seen over the Christmas holidays, right? We had Christmas, the New Year's break. And then, schools in Northern Ontario went back a week late. And then in Southern Ontario and Toronto, not back till the end of January. So yes, I would think we need to just keep track of the news and follow the news, because I would think that this might be extended past the spring break, depending on what the numbers look like.
We'll be right back. I think the other thing that we have to be a little bit clear about here is that, there's a number of factors going on here, rising case counts, but school staffing, I think, is starting to become an issue, and that some teachers are very, very concerned about their safety. The fact of the 47-year-old teacher who's on a ventilator right now in the UHN network, I know from speaking personally to teachers, that has shaken a lot of them. What have you been hearing from teachers and education workers?
So they are worried, right? They do see the rising case counts in the community, and then they see rising counts in schools. I think we have to look at it, overall in the province, about 1/4 of schools have at least one case. So maybe that's not a lot, but if you see these outbreaks coming and going in your school and in your school area, that is a concern. Teachers have also raised concerns about class sizes, proper ventilation, PPE, and things like that. And now you hear the teacher unions in particular, and they are actually calling for this morning in a press conference they held earlier this morning. They're asking for teachers to be vaccinated over the spring break, because it seems to be a good time. Everybody will be away from the school. They'll have the time, get teacher and education workers vaccinated, and then maybe have some sort of period where, you give the vaccine a bit of time to kick in, a couple of weeks, and then everybody returns to school and it's safe. So that's what they're asking for. In terms of staffing, schools have really struggled because, you have isolation requirements. If, there's an outbreak, your cohort, everybody isolates for a couple of weeks. If you're exposed, you isolate for a couple of weeks. Principals have had a hard time finding occasional teachers. The province opened up teaching positions to students in universities still, in teacher faculties, so that they could help sort of fill this gap. In the past, principals would maybe fill in or call in an occasional teacher. They can't find them. And principals can't congregate classes like they used to because of the cohorting requirements. So in the past, if 2 teachers called in sick, you might just combine the classes and put them in the gym. Well, you can't do that anymore. We've also heard from principals who said, look, we're so desperate that we have lunchroom supervisors, we have unqualified people filling in because that's all we can find at this point.
You mentioned that press conference with the union, so they're pushing for the vaccination. Anything else interesting come from that?
It was interesting. Colin Furness, who's a professor at the University of Toronto, was there. He was talking about transmission in schools, because the unions do feel it's unsafe, teachers do feel it's unsafe. And he was saying, look, the research is kind of mixed on this, but the problem is we don't have a good idea of transmission in schools. And also there is the issue that once it rises in the community, you're going to see it in the schools. We also heard from, the teachers were saying that they wanted improved safety in schools, which they've been calling for all along. The vaccine issue is now, of course, emerging as the big one. They do want teachers vaccinated as soon as possible. Harvey Bischoff, who heads the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, he was the one saying, let's get everybody vaccinated over the spring break. And, epidemiologists say 3 weeks after that, the vaccine kicks in, and then maybe everybody can return to school safely after that.
It's funny about that vaccination. There was a petition that, reached over 50,000 people. A lot of people have been talking about teachers and other essential workers getting moved up. Obviously, right now, everything has been sort of age-based when it comes to vaccinations in the province. The Premier mentioned this as a possibility yesterday. Now, is this just an idea right now? Do we know, is this something that could possibly start happening and be ramped up in the next little while?
So the Premier yesterday said that they're working on a plan. They're working with boards and they're working with the Education Ministry on this. So I expect to see something. And certainly we are seeing increasing calls from teacher unions, but also the school boards themselves, principals, everybody saying, let's get education workers vaccinated. If keeping kids in school is your main priority, this is one way to do it.
It's one of these things right now. It has been such a yo-yo with parents. It's been such a yo-yo with kids. There's been a lot of talk about the long-term effects on kids and them being behind and having some sort of an education gap. What are you hearing about that? Or is it too early to even be discussed as we're just trying to get the kids into schools right now?
This is something that should have been discussed a long time ago. And really, there hasn't been a lot of direction from the province. If you look at Prince Edward Island, which is a teeny tiny province, last year, they started talking about the learning gap and ways to address it. You'll hear Education Minister Stephen Lecce talk about summer school and enhanced sort of programming in the summer, which teacher unions have said is not enough. But there are learning gaps. They're already starting to show. The Toronto District School Board was looking at early learners and kids in the primary grades, and their reading is behind. Other studies in other provinces and in the States have found that kids are behind in math and reading. So there are going to be learning gaps, and these are things that are going to have to be addressed. When and how, that sort of seems to be the big question at the moment. But the province is, saying that they will beef up summer school and summer learning in a way to address this.
You kind of already mentioned this, but whose decision is it going to be to reopen schools? The stay-at-home orders affect just about everything else but schools. So will it be the medical officers of health? Who decides when these kids get to go back if they do this year?
Yes, if they do. So this is a decision of the local public health unit, unless there's a province-wide order, which the education minister has said there's not going to be. So it falls to the local public health units to make these calls. Certainly you do see boards, as I mentioned the York board last night, asking for the schools to close, but it is up to the medical officer of health to make that decision.
Kris, is there tension right now between the government and the medical officers of health? The provinces have insisted schools are safe, but also to listen to our health authorities. I mean, how are parents supposed to feel right now? I'll be honest, I expect my kid to be home for the rest of the year.
So the Premier and the Education Minister have repeatedly said schools are safe. Schools are safe. The overwhelming majority of schools are open. The overwhelming majority of students and schools have not had any cases. The numbers they use don't take into account, boards that have shut down all their schools. But, for sure, you can say, if 1 in 4 schools has at least one case, is that good? Again, it's hard to judge. And that's what Colin Furness was saying this morning, that it's hard to know because we actually don't know how much transmission is in the schools. I mean, the thing is, we have heard from the medical officers of health. They have said that schools in general are not the drivers of the transmission, but as you see more community cases, which is what we're seeing now, and as you see the variants, right, that is where the concern is. I mean, we heard last week from the science table, and they were saying whole families are getting it now. The variants are ripping through entire families. They had one family entirely in the ICU. They had another family where everybody in the family died from it. So that's where you're seeing the concern is because it's rising in the community, and therefore it is getting into the schools.
I think the other thing is our reporting has also shown that, it's manufacturing, it's factories, it's a lot of essential workers. I mean, is there any talk about, moving them up the vaccine chain as well, potentially, and focusing specifically on those hotspots?
Yes, and I think you've seen that too. And I think also we're expecting today to see that there's going to be maybe a drop in age limits for vaccines in the hotspots. And that's certainly something the teacher unions were calling for, that, more vaccination in hotspots. There's also been asking for more testing in schools, the rapid tests in schools, maybe a couple of times a week. The province had promised about 50,000 tests a week, and they're nowhere near that at the moment. So that's another way, I think, to help curb the transmission in schools and keep everyone in schools and keep them safe.
How are your kids feeling about this one?
Yeah, I got to admit, this one's going to be tough, right? They were enjoying being back at school. I mean, my kids are in high school. They go every other morning. But, it's a chance to see their friends. It's a chance to see their teachers. Yeah, I think the stay at home and the shutdown order is going to be tough on them. I mean, on our side, we have the fact that the weather's getting much nicer, right? So you can go out for a walk. You can sit in the backyard. I was saying to them, when it gets really warm, do your schoolwork in the backyard. So we're trying to find a little joy here and there, but it's tough. The kids want to be with their friends, and it's hard to keep them away from them.
So my daughter came home with literally everything from the year. So bags and bags. It looked like garbage to me, but supposedly it was some sort of homework maker things, but it just sort of felt like there was a finality to it. And she was even ready for it. She was like, I know that I need to bring all this stuff. Otherwise I may never see it again. Kris, this has been fantastic for us. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you think that our listeners should know?
Well, the one thing I was going to mention, it actually is maybe for parents with older kids, and it's a trend we're starting to see in the United States, and it has to do with post-secondary education. There have been 3 big universities now. So we've heard from Rutgers, Cornell, and now Brown University, and they're saying that if students want to come back in the fall, if they want to be on campus and in class learning, they have to be vaccinated. So that's just something to keep in mind. I mean, we haven't seen that here, but I do wonder if that will be, something that kids will have to do before they go back to university or college in the fall.
Well, I feel super bad for this past year's freshmen, and I guess potentially next year's freshmen, because Frosh Week, while crazy, it was an experience. It is something that I'm sad that people have missed, and I hope that there's some hope for those kids to get on campus and have that true university experience. Kris, this has been fantastic for us. I hope that our kids get back into school this year, but I'll be honest, I think the best thing for all of us to do is to take a wait-and-see attitude. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks, Raju.
Kris Rushowy is a reporter in the Star's Queen's Park Bureau who covers Ontario politics. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Raju Mudler, Adrian Chung, and Saba Etisaz. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.